indeed my pleasure to welcome you to this CREATE session that's Reimagining and Indigenizing the library's role in educating new teachers. And we want to acknowledge that we're on the unceded territory of the Musqueam people, and we're very thankful to be here. And one of the things about today's session is that we are celebrating our education library, and we're celebrating the First Nations House of Learning Weewa Library, because we have evolved and changed. And some of us who know the history really well know exactly how much we have changed. And I want to express the gratitude to those before us who in fact led to the formation of the education library, which came from a curriculum lab. And I do want to honor Howard Hurt, because he always had a vision that we would have the journals and the professional materials, the theory and teaching methodologies materials, together with the curriculum materials. And with the strong leadership of deans in education, Dean Nancy Sheehan and Dr. Dean Birch, we managed to have the library that we do now. We moved from a third floor, very small space, to this space. And I think we have evolved and are continuing to evolve and change. And that's the purpose for today's gathering, is that we want to begin the dialogue. We want to share with you some ideas about how we're revisioning and reimagining our role. Similarly, and Anne, you're going to have to help me and correct me, but I remember also World War II huts at the back of the education building here. I remember going to meet with Verna Kirkmans, and she then became the director of the First Nations House of Learning. And I remember there were really special materials in that World War II hut. And then from there, we know that there was a transformation and the collection, that it ended up getting cataloged, and now we have the First Nations House of Learning Weewa Library. And what it demonstrates to me is that the Faculty of Education values libraries, and that the Faculty of Education has provided a very strong leadership role with respect to our education library. And I'd like to, this may be a bit controversial, but I'd like to suggest that faculties of education in Canada that have strong education libraries may be described as having a quality teacher education program. And I'm thinking here of the University of Alberta, the University of Saskatchewan, Queen's University, OISE, University of Toronto, McGill, and Memorial, that all have separate education libraries. So this is not a sweet affair, but there are Hershey Kisses on your table. And we do want to begin. I want you to pick up one of the clickers that I hope is at your table. If not, you can get one. Okay. And this is a Hershey's question. How many Hershey's Kisses are produced every minute? And I'm going to get my machine on. Get yourself a clicker. I hope you have one. If you don't, I'll give you one here. Okay. Has everybody got a clicker here? You want to find out what you think? This is from a book, Every 60 Seconds. Something is happening in the world. Do you have a clicker? Everybody have a clicker? That's great. Okay. All right. Here we go. Great. All right. Just very quickly. How many Hershey Kisses are produced every minute? And you can, I'm going to start your voting now. Let's actually start now. Okay, we got 2 in, 3 votes in, 5 votes in, 6 votes in. No, not yet. Everybody pointing? Is that 6? Good. Let's go. Let's keep going. There's a few more here. 8. Good. 7. This is produced every minute. Every minute. What happens if you vote twice? No, it shouldn't take you twice. Is everybody voting? Make sure your button is on at the bottom. Everybody's got theirs on. Now we see some difference. Okay, wait. Make sure the button's on. Make it. That's good. 13, 15, 16. Okay, all right. Okay, we'll stop it there. I think you get the hang of it next, and we'll just display our results. See what you said. Oh, A, 55,555. Do you realize that you are right? 62% of you are right. 55,555 are produced every minute. Have a Hershey. Contribute to this thing. Okay, let's look at our next question. How many pounds kilograms of gold are mined every minute. I'm going to start you now. Vote. Okay. So we'll get to a certain level. All right, we'll stop and display. Get it up. Okay. Oh my goodness, this group is so smart. 60% is the right answer. 22.3 pounds per minute of gold is mined in the world. The D answer, 13.5 pounds, that's the United States in terms of the gold mine, which I found pretty interesting. Okay, so those are according to From Every Minute on Earth. That's from that book. Now we just want to take a look. This is according to CTV News. Okay, how many eager consumers? Let me start you. Let's get going. Sorry. Okay.
On that day?
That day, on Friday, September 21st, when the iPhone, they all lined up and they bought their iPhones. How many in the world were actually purchased? Okay. All right, let's just stop and we'll display. Okay. See what happens. Okay, so 8,981. No, it was actually 2,100, according to Lisa LaFlamme and CTV News. Okay. So that's what that's based on. Okay. So thank you for your participation. I'll have you just turn your clickers off for right now. So our big question, and the questions that we are asking ourselves, revolve around the library, of course, and thinking about, right now there are key questions that we want to be asking ourselves. What is the core strength and contribution that a library can make to teacher education? And is that valued? So what is the core strength and contribution of a library to teacher education? What relationships already exist and do we need to strengthen within our teacher ed community, with our faculty, with our schools, with our library community? Answers to these questions will relate not simply to the presence of a resources collection, but to the competencies and roles played by librarians. As librarians, our goal is to be collaborators, to share to determine and share a vision with you that is strong and results in a relevant library program. We wonder together what it's going to look like in 3 years' time, 4 years' time, in 5 years' time. What has been demonstrated through the evolution of our library so far is that we've had a very strong collaborative relationship. We are part of a learning community, and as part of that learning community, we really want to make sure that our teacher candidates succeed. We really want to ensure that they have quality teaching and learning experiences here. And I always remember Cheryl Adams saying, one of our librarians from before, we have double duty here. We have to make sure that teacher candidates go away with a really positive experience of library, because they carry that with them to their schools and to their public libraries. So collaboration and participation are one of our key goals. And in part of that learning community, we have a goal with the faculty is teacher candidate success, but we're also part of a larger learning community. We are part of a library community, we're part of a school community, and our colleagues and professionals, both in the public libraries, in the academic libraries, and in the school libraries, are extremely important to us. When we saw that research was inquiry was a fundamental pillar of the revised teacher education program, we probably did a collective, yahoo! Research and inquiry is something that we're extremely passionate about. But what we've had to do, I think, as librarians, is shift our view with this as a pillar as part of the teacher education program, and go back and revisit some of the theorists. And John Dewey probably is one of the classic educators. And when he talks about dispositions for inquiry and dispositions that are important for teachers really resonates really strongly with ourselves as professionals. John Dewey talks about 3 dispositions. Open-mindedness, which is the active desire to listen to more than just one side. And I was thinking of the poll, Joanne, in the Wong House, where we listen twice as much as we speak. Responsibility, that's the capacity and commitment to carefully consider the personal, academic, and social consequences of our actions. And then something called wholeheartedness, which is the willingness to critically examine our own assumptions and beliefs, as well as the results of our action. So when we started to think about our shift, I met with Marga Filipenko, and I arranged to sit in on the problem-based learning cohort for several classes and for part of their practica. I also had the chance to sit in with Anne Phelan and one of the pilot inquiry groups, just to review and think for myself, what is learning and what is inquiry? And what I saw a lot happening is that students were very engaged in social discussion. So their learning was not only an individual process, but it was very much a social process, and they were thinking together, and they were engaged. Libraries are changing because of the technology-rich environment that we live in. It is a digital context, so we are evolving and changing. This questing disposition that's employed by gamers is involved in learning, and we are involved in it too. We solve a problem, we try to come to some definitive endpoint, but we never reach it, and that moves us maybe to another level, but we have to start all over again. And as we evolve and reframe our library instruction, we are reminded that we need to incorporate some real basic things, though. The importance of relationship with our teacher candidates, the value and experiences of play, and understanding their emotions as they become teaching professionals. Dean Frank and Rita Irwin talked about the complexities of teaching when they welcomed our teacher candidates this fall. It is a complex process, and so is inquiry. There is a shift in our library culture, one of focusing, I think, on dispositions of inquiry rather than what I probably thought I was teaching before, which were the skills. And we know that, and this is a shift, I think, that's represented in our school library world. This is a document coming from Ontario School Library Association, and they talk about being together for learning and positioning their school libraries as a place where learning is occurring. And the focus is on learning to learn, not a place where we're learning necessarily just facts. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that the British Columbia Teacher Librarians Association have a points of inquiry framework that they're certainly using in their teaching and working with students in schools. So we know that we are missing that group today, and I feel badly that they're not here. But they are a large membership in our community with respect to thinking about the role of libraries in educating new teachers. So as we try to reframe our library instruction, I do think there's a bit of a shift here. In the past, our library instruction is highly structured, but there seems to be, as I observed the PBL group, a need to accept messiness, a need to move to more opportunistic times, really partnering with faculty, teaching and learning together with students. It's not possible to know all the answers to their particular problems, and so it is a real thing of trying to move together and make meaning, I think, of the world that we share, which is a one of loving to educate children. The physical spaces and collections have changed. You can see our students working outside in the summertime. So what will this space, how can we reconfigure this space to be really relevant to our students? We need to let go of content, we need to focus on process, and we have to get used to kind of a flipped classroom. So this was the library skills focus that we had in our education library program, where we actually looked at particular skills and then we mapped them to particular courses. So trying to do that with dispositions, sort of played with that a little bit, so open-mindedness, and trying to again think of where could we map this to the new program? Where are the opportunities for real engagement in this process? But I'm still trying to refigure, these are really important dispositions. They're ones we share as faculty, librarian, and teacher candidate. So where does that fit, though? Where are the meaningful junctures in our teacher education program as we work along? The common task for us as librarians right now is mapping our instruction and mapping our collections to the program and the needs of teacher candidates and faculty. And so that's an ongoing discussion and process and collaboration. And following me, Sarah's going to talk a little bit more about mapping to collections.
Thanks, Joanne. Just going to switch slides. So continuing the conversation about how we're mapping our collections to the curriculum, I'd like to share some of the initiatives that are happening at the Waywa Library. Again, my name is Sarah DuPont. I'm the Aboriginal Engagement Librarian at Waywa Library, and I've been here for just a year. I'd like to thank you all for coming and thank my colleagues for being here to support me. How are libraries reimagining our collections? During this presentation, we're going to explore changes in how we are developing library collections with e-resources, our physical collections, and media in ways that support our education faculty and teacher candidates. We're also exploring ideas around finding ways to remove barriers to accessing our collections. For example, on the Waywa homepage, you'll find a link to the e-resources collection available to community members and our alumni remotely. Physical collections at Waywa are organized using the Brian Deere classification scheme and the First Nations House of Learning subject headings, which aim to group together similar things on the shelves and more effectively describe them. At Waywa, we're gearing up for a research project to develop and implement the First Nations House of Learning thesaurus. Representation of Aboriginal peoples and Indigenous knowledge is a central theme in this research, which is being developed and led by our head librarian, Ann Doyle. One goal of the intellectual work that goes into the development of these knowledge organization systems is to make Indigenous collections, which have been historically misrepresented, more accessible. My presentation today will focus on the collection as it would be most relevant to you as researchers and as instructors. Our physical collections consist of curriculum resources and research materials, broken down into learning kits, maps, hands-on materials, and games. And for research materials, we have theses and dissertations, journals and articles, and archival and special collections. Imagine more streaming video sources. Diverse streaming video sources that are clearly for use in the classrooms. The current copyright environment at UBC has made use of media in classrooms a challenging task. Librarians are working on finding more sources that you can use. One example of this is a subscription to the National Film Board's online streaming media. We're also developing new tools to guide faculty and students to streaming media that is for classroom use. I'd like to highlight some of these sources. Right, double click. Via the Aboriginal Films and Filmmakers Research Guide, which is available at UBC Library's homepage. I wanted to show you this guide that was authored by my colleague Kim Lawson recently, so that I could show you the fact that it exists, for one. Second, another research guide, Films Finding and Using. This research guide points to library and web online films, as well as connects you to copyright and how to cite sources. So one example that I wanted to show you was for the web. Who here has used TED Talks in their teaching? Great. Who here has thought about if you're permitted to use TED Talks in your teaching? So at the library, we're not the copyright police, but we are here to help guide you answering some of those questions that you may have when you're preparing your curriculum. So this is a really handy resource for you. TED, Ideas Worth Spreading, is on the web tab of the research guide. And through here, you can find information as to how you can use this in your classroom. So the answer is yes, you can use the TED Talks as long as you cite them and credit the source appropriately and follow a few other guidelines. I'd like to give you a word of caution. It's important to read the fine print for the videos that you choose to show, as there are some limitations on items. And as always, if you have questions on copyright, you should check out the copyright homepage off of the library site. And if you have questions about where to find any of these websites, please don't hesitate to give me an email. Back to the slideshow. Oh. Great. Also, imagine primary source materials as curriculum. Waiwa Library currently has archives and special collections and is working on adding to the Waiwa Community Collection on Circle, UBC's institutional repository. We have also facilitated the development of the Verna Kirkness phone in partnership with the UBC Archives. Also, imagine coordinating with exhibit partners to incorporate them into your curricula. For example, the Waiwa Library, the Education Library, along with CTLT, MOA, the Audrey and Harry Hawthorne Library and Archives, the Native Youth Program, UBC faculty member Dana Claxton, Musqueam, and other partners worked together to develop an exhibit called Aboriginal on History Month at the Irving K. Barber Learning Center this June. The displays and programs were centered around conversations for celebrating National Aboriginal Day. These are from some of the displays, as are these photos. Ideas and partners are needed for the June 2013 display, and I urge you to think about how your summer classes might benefit from exhibits that were developed to support your curricula. Here we have a display case that was developed with FINESC, or First Nations Education Steering Committee materials, with a contribution from one of our NITEP students. NITEP stands for Native Indian Teacher Education Program. Brandon Peters authored 3 books, and his school district partnered with him to get them published so that they'll be part of that school system's curricula. So he generously donated them to the Waiwa Library collection, and we were able to celebrate them as part of Aboriginal and History Month. So in this case, we had a modem that would play a slideshow of images, and it talked about stereotypes. And so we have Barbie dolls conversing about the stereotypes being shown through the slides. And we also had some items from my own personal Métis collection and resources. I'll now highlight some of our e-resources. I'd like you to think about how some of these could benefit your research and your teaching as your students are learning here at UBC. At the end of the session today, we will be engaging in a discussion centered around spaces, collections, and services. So I encourage you to think about how these existing collections could be enhanced for your varied needs. The first collection that I'd like to show you is our Aboriginal ebook collection. So at the UBC Library, we have an Aboriginal ebook collection, and we have 575 titles. There are other ebook collections on campus as well. And I encourage you to think about how multi-user licenses for course reserves could be used for ebooks, as they are now available on some items. Historically, it was one item, one user at any given time. But now the option to purchase multi-user licenses is available for some materials. So I encourage you to contact your subject librarian, which would probably be Joanne and Danielle, if you're interested in incorporating some of these ebooks collections into your course reserves. Other digital collections include the UBC Library Digital Collections, and also Circle, which is UBC's institutional repository. I wanted to highlight a new addition to Circle, which is the Nooksack Place Names book. So I'm headed to the record for it, and Circle is accessible online and remotely with no CWL login necessary. You can view items in PDF, and I wanted to show you the audio component that's been built into this place names book, which I think you'll find interesting. So here we have an elder speaking about place names in traditional language. So that's one example of a contribution to Circle. I spoke about streaming video earlier in this presentation, and I'd now like to show you one example of a DVD that we've purchased with public performance rights for use in your classroom. But it's also available via the campus subscription to the National Film Board streaming media. It's called Aboriginality, and it's a 5-minute conversation starter that touches on urban Aboriginal youth and the disconnect that some of them might have from their culture. The video incorporates hip-hop and transitions the accompanying rap music into a traditional Greek dance. video is that in 5 minutes, so much has been packaged into a conversation about identity and culture and spirituality and urban youth. It's a really great piece for classroom use. So I wanted to show that to you today, just to show how much can happen in such a short period of time. And that there are lots of resources available that are similar in length and impact. Another resource that I wanted to share with you that we as librarians at WAWA have been drawing upon in our partnership and relationship building with CTLT and Amy Crow, who's here, is the What I Learned in Class Today resource. And by attending the Classroom Climate Series, when we are serving our patrons at the reference desk, our patrons who come to us with questions, perhaps they're in the Education 440 class, who are new to learning about questions of Aboriginal identity, Aboriginal culture, and it's very new to them, and they don't know how to begin the conversation. We've learned through What I Learned in Class Today and some of the CTLT programming that there are strategies that we as librarians can also incorporate at the reference desk to have those conversations with our students. So this is one place where we guide our students. Another resource that we draw on at WAWA Library is the First Nations Education Steering Committee. The Learning First Peoples webpage has this body of text, which I'm not going to read, but I'm going to use it to introduce the next part of the conversation, which is what are authentic First Peoples texts. So they have some guidelines and principles on how to begin the evaluation process for materials for your classroom. And this segues into our next part of the conversation today. So I'd like to bring Danielle up.
Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about next is how we select resources for use by people from our library. And more specifically, how we select resources and want to encourage teacher candidates to think critically about the resources that they'll be using in their classrooms, both on practicum and when they graduate. So some of the questions we want to ask ourselves are, do the resources, do the books feature appropriate cultural representations? Are the stories inclusive? When I'm selecting a book, I want to make sure that it is well written, it's a good piece of literature. Also that it portrays minorities or the diversities or members of the underrepresented groups in a positive way. So, show you what I mean. When I hold up the book, Little Black Sambo, some things are coming to mind, right? What's coming to mind?
Stereotypes.
Pardon?
Stereotypes.
Stereotypes, thank you. Old. Yep.
Fairly challenged, but
Thank you.
controversial history.
Okay, great. Anything else?
Think about the tigers.
The tigers?
Lots of butter.
Anything else?
Well, unfortunately, the person who wrote it didn't actually have the cultural background to do so.
Exactly.
And maybe then.
Exactly. Okay. Just to contrast that with happy to be nappy. Comes to mind here. Happiness, okay. Confidence, yeah. So these are two very different books. They both feature a minority. But think of how you would feel if you were a child in the classroom, especially a member of that minority, and your teacher pulled out each of these. How would that make you feel? Sarah has another example for us.
So it's often fun to have activity resources in the classroom to build your curricula off of. So here we have two examples. One is a coloring. It's hard to see? Sure. I'm going to open it up and describe it for you. So on the cover we have what looks like a coloring worksheet. So we have pictures of teepees, of headdresses, of people riding on horseback. What do these images make you think about? Anything similar from the last book come to mind?
Old TV, Tonto.
Okay. To contrast, we have this book, and unfortunately the label's been placed right over the title, but it's called Kayak Design. So here we have images of a graph, an architectural schematic type of drawing, and a tub of water with weights and measures in it. On the inside, it talks about science standards. So it's really getting to the science of this type of traditional transportation use. So which one would you use in your classroom if you were a grade 6, 7 teacher? No guesses? I'm sure somebody has a guess. Which one do you think would speak more to your science class, your grade 6, 7s?
The one in your right hand.
The kayak one, right? So it's drawing in mathematics and science into a cultural activity. So this is just one example of what you might pick and what you might not pick.
Okay, so just to go into to think about this a little bit more, what are the things that we need to watch out for? Well, with regard to emission, we need to see if there's a whole group of people, be it based on sexual orientation, ability level, race, ethnic group. If there's a whole group of people that is absent from your collection, that is probably a problem, especially in the classroom. If you're not covering diverse literature as a teacher, you may want to reconsider that. Illustrations, somebody said it. Some of the illustrations can show gross stereotypes. You also want to watch out for tokenism or any kind of illustrations that demean a group. With regard to the storyline, whose definition of success is being used? You want to think about the relationships between the people. Is one person featured in a powerful position with the other people being subservient? That's probably not a good book to introduce into the classroom. With regard to authenticity, we need to think about, is the culture accurately depicted? Is the setting historically accurate? All of those things we should be thinking about. When we're trying to pick diverse resources to use in the classroom, we can't just be happy with it shows someone who is a member of a diverse ethnic group or something. We have to make sure that it's quality literature and authentic. Someone mentioned earlier when we were showing the books about the author or illustrator's background. What qualifies them to write about that group? You might want to analyze some of the biographical data that could be available on the back flap, or even Google them and see. Because that brings up the whole issue of cultural thievery. And can someone write about a group that they aren't a member of? Language. I've noticed that this is more of an issue with older books. So does it use sexist language? Just demeaning language? Again, that is not something that you would want to have in your classroom unless you're using it in a specific way. And we'll have a video clip that we're going to show that will explain what I mean by that. So these are some websites that you can check out if you're interested in more information on that. And this is what I was getting at. So we have a short video that features Toby Rajput, Assistant Professor, Children's and Youth Literature Librarian at National Louis University. And we contacted her to play this video with her permission.
A lot of these books are on the shelf of every library I've ever been in. For example, there's a book that most people might remember called The Five Chinese Brothers. It was written in 1938, I believe. And it's been on the shelf in Chicago Public Schools Professional Library, National Louis Library. When I was looking through books in my house to start this presentation on these kinds of books. My son, who's now an adult, saw Five Chinese Brothers on the table and said, oh, I love that book. And this is how we feel. We love these books. We remember them nostalgically. But when I told him, well, I'm looking at books that have racist images, he just took one look at the cover and he got it completely. He immediately understood. The point is that children absorb images and values from books implicitly, without thinking about them. The fact that the cover of this book shows 5 identical figures, Chinese in that they have yellow skin and are wearing pigtails, and if that's the only book about Chinese people that you have in your collection, that is the image for students who are not living in diverse schools. Whose voice is being heard and whose voice is not being heard. And I can show you an example. Can I show you an example? Of 2 books that I've used in class, and this is actually based on the work of Jean Mendoza and Debbie Reese from the University of Illinois. But just briefly, here are 2 books. Each of them is about a Mexican or Mexican-American grandfather and grandson. And without even looking at the text or the content of the book, just from the cover, you can see that the tone of this book is thoughtful, maybe negative. There's garbage on the ground. The grandfather and his grandson are sitting on the ground staring off. There's no positiveness about this picture. Whereas this book, A Gift from Papa Diego, first of all, you notice that the text is in both English and Spanish. And it turns out, actually, in this book, the problem is caused because the grandfather doesn't speak Spanish. So by reading against the grain, you can gather tone and attitude toward the characters and the text without even reading a single word. Librarians do not censor books. However, we do buy books and shelve books based on their appropriateness for the population we're working with. But the other thing that I recommend in the article is that we teach kids to read critically. In other words, we use a book like Five Chinese Brothers to point out the fact that not all Chinese people look alike, and teach them how to not just absorb messages from books, but read them critically. And if we do this, then we never need to be afraid of any of the books on our shelves. Since I wrote this article, I have also changed my thinking from the negative, as in, oh, maybe this is a book I don't want to give to kids, to what is our responsibility as teachers and librarians to have books that balance those stereotypes that are going to show up, particularly in older books.
Okay, so she misspoke when she said that the problem was that the grandfather didn't speak Spanish. She meant that he didn't speak English. So when selecting this video, we really liked how she described how libraries, through the act of selection, hold an innate power to shape ideas and determine what stereotypes and attitudes children are exposed to. Teacher candidates will also be selecting works for curriculum and general resources in their classrooms. In the academic library settings here at UBC, they have access to both the items and librarian knowledge to engage critically with examples of both positive and challenging materials. And I had never heard of the Five Chinese Brothers, so I had to just look it up. And I could immediately see.
Can I make a point about that book? This is a very complex issue. That story, the whole gist of it is that they are supposed to be identical. And this is the complication with it. That's why the kids love the book. Now, the issue of yellow is another issue. It has to do with complex issues of color separation. Unfortunately, she cited a great article about authenticating children's literature, which is something we can all do. But that book is problematic, if I may be so bold to say, sadly.
Yeah, no, and I can see both points to that, because even if there was just one image, I still think that that is not the most positive representation. So.
Unfortunately, story is at the basis. But what I didn't mean to be critical then.
Oh, no.
What this brings to mind is how complicated this business of authenticating children's literature is, both in the illustration and in the text. But Julie Flett, and maybe some of the Aboriginal folks will know the proper citation. There is something called Good Minds. Does that ring a yes? Okay, that's a great website that lists First Nations books that have been authenticated.
It's coming up.
Oh, it's come. Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm stealing your thunder. Just tell me to shut up.
No, thank you very much for bringing that up. We'll head to the next slide and happily show you some of the Evaluating Children's Materials resources that we have on our Aboriginal Children's Literature Research Guide. And when I took this screenshot, Good Minds was not yet part of it, but it is now. So we're going to head there. But before we head to the website, I just wanted to point out that we do recognize that these are really complex issues. And so in the Brian Deere classification system, there is a call number, we call it the YUDs, the YUDs. And the label for this call number is items needing careful interpretation and bridging. So we're not putting these resources out there to you and saying that we should not be using them in the classroom, but we're putting them out there saying we do need to really think critically about the content that is in the book, whether they be visual stereotypes represented or things in the text and in the story that don't necessarily represent different cultures and different peoples in a way that they would choose to represent themselves. So I'm just going to take us to the research guide and head to the evaluation tab. Oh, I guess Good Minds didn't make it on there. It will be on there after this presentation. So thank you for bringing that up. Good Minds is one, but there are others that we have on this tab of our research guide that are favorites. And one of my favorites is the American Indians Children Literature blog, which is authored by Debbie Reese. On this blog, I'm going to actually go to it. So many of us here are familiar with the Twilight series, I would assume. Show of hands. Okay, great. So when I first read the Twilight series books, I was a little concerned about how the Kuya people are represented in these books. There are references to traditional tales, traditional knowledge. It's quite heavily drawn upon for the story. And so I often thought, I wonder if this is really okay. But I never actually thought to go out looking for critical evaluations of the story and representation of these people in the story. Well, Debbie Reese on her blog did the work for me, which was nice. So, oh, sorry, I scrolled very quickly. As you can see, it's a very, very well posted to blog. She has a lot of articles on here about numerous titles. Today it's The Lesser Blessed, which is coming out on video, if you're not aware of that. I'm pretty excited about it. But really quite a ways down the screen is a whole series of, it's very touchy. There it is, the Twilight Saga. Okay. So here are a lot of critical pieces that were written about this series. So I invite you to go and check them out if you yourselves are curious as to how some people feel about it. So I'm going to head back to the research guide. Okay. Then we also have, of course, items in our collection that discuss the issue of evaluating children's materials for Aboriginal content. So I invite you to check out our research guide and contact us if you want to further the conversation. Joanne is now going to come up to speak to digital pedagogies. Great.
So the question comes with respect to, for example, evaluating learning resources. Where is the best fit for that, and how can we work collaboratively to raise these issues for discussions with our teacher candidates? It's a very important part of their selecting and critically evaluating learning resources. But in addition to that, and I do want to honor Dr. Job on this one, we have a collection of Canadian materials in our library, which he managed to have in our library, the Canadian Children's Book Center collection. So one other part of evaluating learning resources is being aware of our own creators and our own writers and our own culture. And so that Canadian collection is a really valuable part of, again, educating our teacher candidates. Paradigm shifts with respect to digital. We have there's a paradigm shift in the culture of schooling, but it's moving really slowly, I would venture to say. Making shifts in school culture is often not fast. And I'm drawing upon the work of Marian McDorey, whose dissertation looked at the new literacies of Web 2.0. And she did a case study within one school district and many schools where she looked at, in this case it was adolescents and their use of web resources and the way their teachers were using Web 2.0 resources. And so one of the challenges for us in teacher education and educating new teachers is preparing teachers to be leaders for tomorrow. But they also come in contact with the culture of the school where they need to practice their skills. And there sometimes are tensions between what we see as a vision and what in fact occurs in the school. And there will be great variance in the schools as to the adoption of new literacies, and there's inequalities and some differences in terms of types of technologies and what is digital and what's available within the school world. We know that the Internet's used for communication by a number of young people. We know it's used a lot for entertainment. We know that it's used a great deal for socializing. We know that it's used a great deal for shopping. But the question is, how are we best going to employ the digital technologies in our teaching and in our learning with our students? And I do, again, want to draw upon some of the things that Miriam found when she was taking a look at the district that she was. She's looking at how they implemented digital literacies in the schools. And the principal at the focal school had adopted this goal, and he was encouraging his teachers to implement Web 2.0 tools. Survey findings showed that the majority of the teachers were not using Web 2.0 tools in their practice. However, 3 teachers who were investigated, and they found that these teachers used the tools in both new literacy ways and in traditional ways. Some of the advantages of the Web 2.0 world is that it is distributed. In other words, you have opportunities to connect with people around the world and to connect in meaningful ways with people who are not physically with us. One advantage of the Web 2.0 world is the notion of a more democratic society. We can vote online. We can stir up trouble, and I just hate to think of that YouTube that's caused all of this trouble. But there is a notion that the word can be spread, and it is a democratic medium. We know that it is in fact collaborative and that it is affecting numbers of countries. We hope it promotes democracy. Stop, or I'll tweet them. Okay. All right. Within schools, we have pictures like this one, and the students, however, are not frequently using the internet in ways that engendered practices associated with the new literacies. And I just want to allude to some of them. Google, yes, very popular, the most preferred search engine. Downside of Google is thinking of searching for Mercury. What do we mean? Mercury the planet, Mercury the boat, Mercury the vehicle, Mercury the element, Mercury, oh God, or maybe we mean Freddie Mercury. For children, learning, distinguishing all of those possibilities needs some support and help and some adult intervention. For children for whom English is not their first language, they would need some support and help. So that's where our digital pedagogies come in. I just wanted to share with you one of Miriam's findings. This is the time that Nicole spent on a Google search. These are not in minutes. These are in seconds. So these are 1, 2, 3, 5 tasks. The maximum amount of time she spent was 11.8 seconds doing her search. 11.8 seconds, that's not very long. Here's Darren. He's a little bit higher, but not much. This was them searching, okay? Then I wanted to share what she found with Nicole when she was visiting the web page. This now is in seconds still. The maximum amount of time she spent on the task was 60 seconds on that web page. Darren again, he spent a little longer, 180 seconds maximum and some other tasks. But you can see the duration, the patience, the persistence, which we all know is accompanied with in-depth inquiry and deeper learning, is not being exhibited. In this case, this is with high school students. And she has much more data to demonstrate that, and so do other information research scientists. So if you take a look at this is an example, the top of the web page is where students are spending almost all their time. Do you think they're going to get down to here? So this has implications for reading and how we instruct students regarding reading on the web. And what do we do? What interventions and ways do we work with students about accessing and using the web? Okay. Other findings she had is students didn't bookmark things. They didn't use the search box. They would always type in a URL. They didn't necessarily evaluate the sites they were looking at. They weren't using any of the advanced features, and they were not adequately revising their searches. And I think in some of our observations, we haven't done any critical research on that, I would observe similar behaviors from our teacher candidates as they're working with their materials as well. So, do students use Web 2.0 sites more for self or school-selected reasons? Let's just see if this will show. It's actually, well, the animation isn't showing. It's for self, not for school. So the Web 2.0 things they're using for themselves, not necessarily for their school activity. Oh, it won't even go period now. Okay. Let's just try you one more time. That way this is not going to go. Okay. Which do students use more for their schoolwork? Library books or internet? That's actually they're using internet. You'll see that thing fall down. It actually worked, but it didn't, so that's okay. Okay. So, here are the percentage of students using different resources for completing their schoolwork, and this is based on one PhD. Textbook handouts, library books, internet. But I've just been interviewing the students in the problem-based learning cohort, and I get a feeling, and I haven't written up all the data, that matches pretty much their usage patterns as well, in terms of how they're using materials in our library. So one thing that comes to mind is that students are not being assigned projects where they're in fact using the internet a great deal, or where they're contributing to the internet. That is not occurring, it would seem, in any great numbers. They're not using the web in a knowledge-creative manner. In other words, they're not adding to knowledge as they work through. So what are the implications for the library? Well, the library has a role to play. And one of the big roles we play, I always feel, in our communities and in our academic institutions and in our schools, is we are a place where there's equity of access. And I am even amazed this year with the difference in the technology that students bring when they come to our program. There are some who have really excellent laptops and are very, very familiar with a lot of technology, and there are students who do not have the same type of access at all. They have a very old laptop, or they really have technology that is outdated because they simply can't afford anymore. So I always view the library as a place whereby we ensure equity of access. This is taken from a Pew Research Center's report about the people who use ebooks. And it's not surprising, and I've got to just read you this because I find it very interesting. It's not surprising that the majority of ebook readers come from, this is 16 and more, they come from more highly income, homes that have high income. They have more educational experience, and they're more likely to be tech savvy. Not all e-reading device owners read e-books, but in general they do so at a much higher rate than the general population. They are also more likely to read in general and to read a book on a typical day. Their reading habits are not confined to books. They are more avid readers of newspapers, magazines, books, e-books than any other Americans, and are more likely to read long-form content of any kind for pleasure. So hence the library's role in promoting reading and the habit of reading continues to be a big part of what we do. And we need to promote reading to our teacher candidates so that they become reading professionals. Digital fluency, this is the writing part, communicating on the web. Again, the digital divide there. If you have not had experience, you don't feel confident of putting your ideas out there, you're not going to be able to comment and contribute to a blog. So digital fluency, that's part of our pedagogies that we're trying to teach. What it means to use Google Docs, what it means to write collaboratively on the web, what it means to put your ideas forward. So what is the library's role? And this is what we keep coming back to. I'm amazed at how the library continues to be branded as a book place. It is the book place. Very few people view the library as this electronic space. So that continues to be the reality of the viewpoints that often are put forward about the library. The value, though, is as we move ahead, we want to share our ideas about how we can work together with faculty. And I took the opportunity of bugging Margot Filipenko before she left. So I said to her, Margot, what do you think librarians can do for you? Three things that were important for her is they can assist me with copyright issues and help me post key resources to my Vista site. They can ensure that students know how to cite and present. And we need to create opportunities where we can see the librarians and library staff as part of our community. So those were just three of her ideas. Danielle's going to share just a bit more, 5 more minutes would be fine, about what faculty support would look like. Yeah. You have to.
Okay, so one new initiative coming out of the library that we wanted to talk to you about, and this is especially important for faculty, is ARIES. So ARIES is a course reserve software program that is being launched within the Faculty of Education in May 2012. So I want to briefly show you how you'll use it, how it works, and how you can get to it. Also, if you're a TA, you could use it as well. So let's check it out. Before I get into it and show you, if you just can remember the clicks I've done, you can also click here and then faculty for step-by-step instructions. It'll make the process of setting up your online course reserves so much easier. Simplifies it, even though that doesn't look very simple there. And there's also video tutorials. There's a few, about 3 minutes each. So let's take a look at it. Okay, so once you get in, it'll look like this. And if you click on the library tab, and you'll see a list of your courses. So I just want to show you how you can add something. Okay, so it's as easy as clicking on Add Reserve. Do you want to add an article, book, website, DVD? Let's say book. The first book that's popping into my head is The Kite Runner. So just type in the title of your book. Hit OK. Where'd it go? I hit X instead of go. So what it's going to do is bring up all of our records for that print resource that we have. You can view it, make sure it's the one that you want, and then click select. You can set how long you want it to be on reserve for. The start and stop dates are automatically populated to correspond to the start and stop dates of the semester. And then simply hit submit item and we will receive that request. Okay? So for online reserve items, it generally will take 3 days, and for print resources, it'll take up to 14 days. But as you can see, it's pretty easy. It's a pretty good way to do it. And that's all we wanted to show you for new things coming that you can look forward to. And now we're going to have a discussion time.